So friends, today's topic is from a Sannyasini's diary. And we are going to be spotlighting Swamis Atmasthananda and Gitananda, two wonderful Swamis. Swami Atmasthananda lived from 1919 to 2017. He was known as Satya Krishna Maharaj, the 15th president of the Ramakrishna order. I first met him in 1979, and at that time he was the assistant secretary in the old mission office with Swami Gitananda as the treasurer. In those days, everything was different than it now is. At 3:30 in the morning, we had ready access to Mangala Arati in the Ramakrishna temple and stayed for meditation with Shibu, our guest house servant and guide, who had served Swami Virajananda. Then we would go and meditate further on the Bellarmat bank of the Ganges in front of Swami Vivekananda's temple. As the sun rose and the jute mill whistle sounded across the river, not knowing that in those early hours, monks were passing behind us as shadows on their way to the Samadhi Ghat to make their pranam. In those days, as American nuns, there was one sannyasini and we were two brahmacharinis. Without our knowing, all eyes were upon us, including those of Bharat Maharaj, Swami Abhayananda, who was Holy Mother's disciple and the mother of the Mat and Mat manager. Swami Premananda, direct disciple of Ramakrishna, had told him to look after the devotees. What were our first impressions of Swami Atmasthananda? In 1979, Pravrajika Brahmaprana, one of the 8 pioneering sannyasinis of Saradamat, Dakshineshwar, and its first general secretary, told us, Swami Atmasthananda is a real karma yogi. He was a dynamic Swami, in charge of the welfare of the old sadhus, and he had initiated the Arogya Bhavan at Bellarmat for the aged or ill sadhus, and gave us a guided tour when under construction in 1979. He was in charge of the protection of the interests of the Mat and mission, and in charge of the relief work of the Ramakrishna mission under the then General Secretary of the order, Swami Vandanananda. From the following story, we see what a real karma yogi he was, tenacious and steadfast in pursuing his goal, even under dangerous circumstances, and spiritually resourceful in doing so. At that time, in 1979, Cherrapunji was a hotspot. Fundamental Christians had infiltrated the area and turned tribals against the Ramakrishna mission ashram. The ashrama water was turned off, and Swami Gokulananda, head of the ashrama school at that time, had fled for his life and had come to Bellarmat. Swami Atmasthananda's job was to go and deal with the tribal chief. And he told us the story. It was not so easy then, he said. We tried everything and failed. Then when I was meditating, the thought came. Ramakrishna said in the gospel, when you go to the tribal people, give the head of the tribe tobacco. Just see his resourcefulness. How Sri Ramakrishna's practical teachings guided this Swami's work to unfold in pragmatic ways. Swami Atmasthananda, the tribal chief was a terrible man. He had killed his uncle in cold blood. His house contained on one side a liquor shop and on the other a butcher shop. He couldn't speak English or Hindi, only his tribal language. But then the Swami remembered that his daughter, Dui Dui, was in the Ramakrishna mission school there. He talked with her and asked for her help. Again, such resourcefulness. The Swami said, Dewey agreed, went to her father, and then announced to me, he's coming. The tribal chief came and we fed him. He melted. Later, I gave Dewey presents, and she wrote a letter in broken English. I cannot give you anything. You have given me everything. I can only give you my love. How beautiful, Maharaj shared with us. So simple. I feel I am Guru Maharaj's servant. This was Swami Atmasthananda, a true follower of Vivekananda, bold, courageous, inventive, and completely impassioned by the goal of life, finding a spiritual thread in whatever work he was asked to undertake. Later, he shared privately, visions, God vision. I had the opportunity to study a little scripture, he said. I have served those whom I think are illumined souls. I didn't care. I would type for them or clean their toilet. What I couldn't achieve through japa or meditation, I feel they have done for me. I feel now as though I am serving Guru Maharaj, meaning Sri Ramakrishna. I was so drawn to this Swami's humility. He was from a very high-class family in Kolkata. His humility was a quality that led to his greatness as vice president and president. But we're getting ahead of our story. Swami Atmasthananda joined the Ramakrishna order in 1941 at 22 years of age. He then lived 3 years at Advaita Ashram in Mayavati, and from 1944 to 1951, he served Swami Virajananda, the 6th president of the order and Holy Mother's disciple at Shamlatal and later at Bellarmat. But when Swami Virajananda went to stay at Shamlatal, he had to demand that Swami Pavitrananda, the then president of Mayavati, send such a Krishna Maharaj to him as his attendant. And he said, if you don't send him to me, I will resign. Such was his love for this Swami. When Swami Atmasthananda was later posted as head of the Rajkot temple of the Ramakrishna Mission Center in 1966, his long cherished dream was to be part of a temple construction. And that came true. But just see the austerities he endured to make his dream come true. Swami Bhuteshananda, the previous head there, had already drawn up a plan for the temple, but told Swami Atmasthananda he wasn't attached to his plan, so the Swami greatly expanded it. When Swami Vireshwananda, the president of the order at that time, visited Rajkot, Atmasthanandaji asked for his blessings and to sign the temple plan. But President Maharaj said, what? You'll have to get the approval of the Board of Trustees. In Swami Atmasthananda's own words, so back and forth I came to Calcutta. Finally, at one trustee meeting, they kept me standing for 1.5 hours. They asked, why do you wish to build such a large temple when few devotees are there? I said, when a temple is there, devotees will come. They passed the plan. The Swami then shared, I raised 7 lakhs by going door to door, but I didn't eat properly because I wanted to save every bit of money for the temple. One night at 11:30 p.m., I was on the bus, but to stop the hunger pains, I had to get off and offered 5 pice to a shopkeeper for some betel. Seeing I was a monk, he gave it freely. He went on. The first lakh, $100,000, came from a Muslim devotee. After 7 lakhs, President Maharaj said, you must cut down on the expense. The temple is now estimated at 22 lakhs. I said, many times I have thought of doing so, but I can't. You show me where to cut. whether in the sanctuary or the temple, but he also couldn't. During the temple construction, there was a watchman who smoked and slept in the Sancta Sanctorum. Atmasthananda ji related. We told him not to do so, but he didn't listen. However, one day that suddenly changed. He no longer slept there. We asked him why, and he told us. One night, a small, very dark girl, bejeweled and shining, came to me, and I was awakened as she stood there. She said, "You are not to sleep here. You sleep downstairs. If you continue to do so, I will cut off your head." Such are the austerities and miracles that can surround a Ramakrishna order temple construction. Next time I met Maharaj, Swami Atmasthananda, was in the winter of 1997. Swamis Prabhananda and Bhajanananda had invited me to a Vedanta conference at the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture. So I came alone to India, and again alone 3 times after that. Swami Atmasthananda became the General Secretary of the order from 1992 to 1997. And in May 1997, he was made Vice President. At that time, he entered into 3 months of solitude and japa. I asked him if it was difficult to adjust from administrative work to spiritual work of the Vice President, one of the initiating gurus of the order. He replied with characteristic openness. At first it was. For 22 years, I had been in the administration, but Swamiji, meaning Vivekananda, says there are 4 types of service: physical, moral, intellectual, and spiritual. Now I cannot even bear to hear about administrative matters. During that pilgrimage, the Swami shared with me some reminiscences of his pre-monastic days with the great Swamis of the order. And from them, we see how they drew newcomers to spiritual life through their intimacy, playfulness, and love, and how their sometimes simple behavior renders a deep teaching that can completely reorient our spiritual perspective. Swami Atmasthananda shared, I was studying for a college degree when I heard that Swami Achalananda, disciple of Vivekananda, was staying at Bellarmont in the Leggett House. And in this picture, we see Swami Achalananda in his youth. When Swami Atmasthananda met him, he was much older and quite spindly. Swami Atmasthananda went on. So when I came, I found a lean, thin man in just a loincloth with a towel wrapped behind his neck. I said, I have come to see Kedar Babu, Achalananda. You have? I will show you. So this Swami took me and walked round and round and round until finally I realized he was Swami Achalananda. He took my hand and waited, an action that Sri Ramakrishna often did when assessing future monks' spiritual character, and then told me many things. Swami Atmasthananda then said, I used to come to stay in a room in the Bellarmont dispensary when I would come and give service to Swami Achalananda, a tiny little room. I would buff his shoes, etc. One day I noticed my shoes were polished. I looked at the brahmachari there and scolded him. I have incurred sin, I said. You have touched my shoes. You are a brahmachari and I a college student. And there was a row. Suddenly, Swami Achalananda came and said, no, he's not touched your shoes. I have. Why, Maharaj? You're a disciple of Swami Vivekananda, and I am a disciple of Swamiji, Vivekananda. So we are cousin brothers. Swami Atmasthananda described the circumstances of his joining the order in January 1941. There was a tussle, he said, between Swami Madhavananda and Achalananda, whether or not I should finish my master's degree. I was only a year away. Madhavananda, who was then the general secretary of the order, felt I should finish. I had good teachers, Radhakrishnan and others. One night, Swami Achalananda came to me with closed fist. You join now, he said. So the next day I took a bath, made pranam in Thakur's temple, then Mother's temple, and went to Swami Madhavananda. I told him, this is what happened last night. Either I join now or I go away. Swami Madhavananda listened and said, you join now. During that 1997 pilgrimage, Swami Atmasthananda opened his treasure trove and described his initiation in 1938 and the inner meaning of spiritual initiation. He said, I received a mantra from Swami Shivananda in dream, but one day Swami Nirvadananda came and instructed me. Swami Vijnananda is at the mat. He's a disciple of Thakur. You must go. So Yuktananda, who was Swami Atmasthananda's younger brother, and I went along with several others. He was staying in the room next to Vivekananda's, which was then kept as a shrine. But when we went into his room, he was just sitting in his chair, slumped over, looking down with many coats on. He never looked up. I went back to Nirvadananda and said, hopeless. He didn't even look at us. How can I take initiation from him? But Nirvadananda just smiled. That night, Swami Atmasthananda said, I had a vision in dream. I was walking down a long, lonely road with Mahapurush Maharaj. Returning to his room, I massaged his feet. But all through the night, Mahapurush Maharaj's form changed into Swami Vijnananda's form. Back and forth, it went like that. Then I realized that they were one and the same. Swami Vijnananda was beckoning me with his hands. Come, come. So the next day I went back. When I had just one foot in the door, Swami Vijnananda looked up and smiled. Hello, you come. He said, tomorrow you come for initiation. He pointed to the picture of Sri Ramakrishna. It is he who initiates. I just introduce you to him. He then told me to ignore the guards who would not allow me to enter his room the next day. So on that day, it was an auspicious day. So Yuktananda and I went. Just as Swami Vijnananda had said, batches of devotees entered his room for initiation, but we were ignored. So when the guards were not looking, we ran by and entered his room. See, it's just as you told us. They didn't allow. Now the day is almost over. No, Swami Vijnananda said, you sit down. And he beckoned us with his outstretched hand. So we sat and received initiation. Swami Atmasthananda shared. As he was giving us the mantra and reciting God's name, it appeared as if he was intoxicated. The atmosphere was indescribable. On the day of his initiation, Swami Vijnananda instructed him, never tell a lie, never be jealous, have love for all. Swami Atmasthananda then shared in compelling and intimate detail how the Lord himself or herself appears to guide us in our spiritual life. After he had joined the order, he went to Kishanpur in the Punjab state for 6 months of austerity. The Swami told us, I was a woman hater, he admitted. When I tried to meditate on Mother, her form would not appear. So I cried and prayed. Then one night, Holy Mother appeared to me. "Why should I appear to you?" she said. "You hate me." "What? How could I hate you?" I said. "I am in so many forms," she explained, meaning the Divine Mother is manifest in womankind. "Never again will I feel that way," I promised. Besides Swami Vijnananda, in his pre-monastic days, Swami Atmasthananda met two other direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, Swamis Akhandananda and Abhedananda. Swami explained, "I met Swami Akhandananda when I was a little boy. He used to come to a house near ours in Kolkata. Later, the Swami used to go to Swami Abhedananda's Ramakrishna Vedanta Mat in Kolkata. At that time, Swami Abhedananda one day told him how Sri Ramakrishna continues to teach even after his Mahasamadhi in 1886. In that connection, Swami Atmasthananda recalled how once he had brought as a gift to Swami Abhedananda a small sandalwood throne for shrine use. During that visit, Swami Abhedananda shared with him that he had been procuring gold to make a special throne for Sri Ramakrishna's shrine photo, until he heard Sri Ramakrishna's voice. "Don't you remember, Kali? I could not even touch metal." Sri Ramakrishna had often told his disciples that his nervous system had undergone such a complete change as a result of his spiritual experience that he could not bear the touch of any metal such as gold or silver. One day, when Sri Ramakrishna was away from Dakshineshwar, Narayan decided to test him and hid a coin under his bed. When the master returned to Dakshineshwar and sat on his bed, he recoiled in such pain as if stung by an insect. When the mattress was examined, the hidden coin was found. Swami Abhedananda then told Atmasthananda Swami, pointing, "So I put away the gold in that chest in the mat. Now has come your sandalwood throne. I shall use that." And perhaps that sandalwood throne is still on the shrine of the Ramakrishna Vedanta Mat in Kolkata today. After Swami Gahanananda's passing on December 3rd, 2007, Swami Atmasthananda became the 15th president of the Ramakrishna order. Swami Atmaramananda, the then head of the Ramakrishna mission in Coimbatore, explained to me. He himself was a trustee. He said at the time, a trustee is made vice president. He receives a list of mantras and they come directly from Sri Ramakrishna, who then gave them to Holy Mother, and she also passed them on to Swami Virajananda. Of course, all of the initiating direct disciples of Ramakrishna had access to those mantras and others. The president of the order is selected through consensus at a meeting of trustees, which is also attended by vice presidents. There is open discussion. Sometimes they're asked to write their name of choice on a slip of paper and submit it. The choice is not always based on seniority. When the cremation of the former president takes place, then the garland that has been offered to Sri Ramakrishna in the main temple in the morning is placed around the head of the new president by the senior-most vice president, and this takes place in the Ramakrishna temple at Bellarmad. I was so fortunate to be standing outside the rear door of the Ramakrishna temple, behind the Sancta Sanctorum, as Swami Atmasthananda's attendants guided him through the temple door, newly garlanded. I'll never forget the beautiful indrawn look in his eyes as he came out onto the temple veranda and made his way across the courtyard to his room to receive pranams from the monks of the order. Later, his first initiation as president would take place in the old shrine as per tradition. As Swami Atmasthananda shared, something happens when these swamis become vice presidents and presidents. It reminded me of the time in 1998 when Swami Atmasthananda visited the Santa Barbara convent and stood on a hillock above the main convent building with a grand vista, and had looked out over the lush convent gardens and grounds, and then further to the ocean itself. His eyes at that time also became calm and indrawn, drinking in the spiritual vibration that is tangibly experienced within by a fortunate few, as best described by Swami Pravrajika many years before to us. Nuns, my children, he said, Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, Maharaj, walk these grounds. I first met Swami Gitananda in 1979. He lived from 1924 to 2014. And I met him in the old mission office he as treasurer shared with Swami Atmasthananda, the then assistant secretary. What struck me then was in that small office, his diplomacy in allowing Swami Atmasthananda, his senior, to carry on a conversation with us, two inquisitive brahmacharinis who enjoyed the company of both of them. Occasionally injecting a hilarious quip, such a keen sense of humor he had. But along with that, a beautiful face that showed a deep meditative life. For him, Kushum Sarbar, near Vrindavan, was his favorite place to go, stay, and meditate. As Swami Atmasthananda informed us in front of him, he likes to go to Kushum Sarbar to stay, bantered Gitanandaji from behind his desk. To me, it was remarkable how these two officers of the order, responsible for such a huge load of work, kept their spiritual practices intact. When I returned to India 18 years later, I made a point to meet with him regularly to discuss this aspect of spiritual life. At that time, he was vice president of the order. Swami Gitananda shared, when I was in administrative duties, I always tried to remain detached. Sometimes there is too much work, but eventually you can find the time to meditate. It's there. The main thing is to try. But what if the mind is restless, I asked. He answered, do not force it. Get up, read, and the mind will then feel inclined. Then try again. Do you prescribe Purscharan, I asked. Purscharan being a spiritual practice wherein the aspirant systematically increases and decreases the number of japa according to the waxing and waning moon. He said, I prescribe meditation from dusk to dawn. If a young monk has done this, it is an experience. He never forgets it. Sometimes once a month. If you can try to do this, it is good. When asked what helps to focus the mind in meditation, Swami Gitananda explained two methods. There are two ways to control the mind, he said, as stated in the Yoga Shastras. One, forcibly bring it back to the object of meditation. Or two, watch the mind until it comes back of its own accord. When the mind wanders and is watched, it feels embarrassed and is brought back. Then he explained a technique that comes later in spiritual life. He said, when an experience comes, it is helpful to relive that experience. Remember the state of consciousness as though you are experiencing it then, and focus on the mood it brought. This helps to focus the mind for deeper meditation. Practice. By practice, the mind is brought under control. What about body pain, I asked. In deeper meditation, is it possible to transcend? Yes, he responded. Rarely, but it sometimes happens. Sometimes body pain gets in the way of meditation, but one can always do japa. I cannot sit cross-legged, so I sit with legs outstretched like mother, he laughed. In this connection, Swami Gitananda shared how uncompromising the direct disciples of Ramakrishna were in regards to the body. He said, when Swami Turiyananda returned from America, he went to perform tapasya, crossed a river, entered a forest, and ate only 1 or 2 chapatis a day. When he crossed back over the river, a woman who first saw him enter the forest complained aloud. You have become emaciated, she cried out. Turiyananda shouted, stop, stop. You are reminding me of my body. Swami Gitananda stressed the value of meditation and shared secrets of spiritual unfoldment. Meditation unwinds karmas, so spiritual experience can then take place. He explained, yes, sometimes experience comes at the time of meditation, and sometimes it comes later with eyes open. One must make time for meditation by not getting involved in television or unnecessary conversations. Most of our conversations are unnecessary, he said. Then there is more time to think of God. It is a question of priority. There comes a time when you must make these decisions. Another day, he explained that there are 2 temperaments, aspirants who experience visions and those who do not. Then he explained how knowledge comes. Sri Ramakrishna explained to Babaram Maharaj, Swami Premananda, for you, there will be no darshan, meaning no visions. Swami Gitananda explained, compared to knowledge, visions are not a very high experience because knowledge never leaves. Here one might be dismayed because knowledge of Brahman comes to very few, but the Swami clarified a type of knowledge we can all achieve. He said, to keep the mantra rolling all the time, that is knowledge. It never leaves. Constant japa. That is my experience, he intimated, but requested me not to quote him during his lifetime. What the Swami was describing was automatic japa, which brings with it tangible experience of mantra shakti, the experience of divine consciousness contained within the mantra. He went deeper into the practice. When asked if it's possible to keep the mantra going with administrative work, he answered, yes, certainly. Whenever you get time, don't let that rascal Thakur, meaning Sri Ramakrishna, escape your sight. He said, at first, when mantra shakti, automatic japam, comes, then it sometimes leaves, but then later it stays. That comes with much practice, but it is due to grace. Still, the mind needs polishing every day. I asked, Maharaj, do you remember what it was like in the beginning? How hard it was to meditate? How hard to focus the mind? He answered, practice, that is all. 6 to 7 hours a day. The direct disciples did 16 hours a day. I asked, sitting? He answered, it's not necessary to be sitting. Any time you can get. reach that point where there is someone inside who is doing japam always, no matter what you are doing or whatever type of work you are doing, there is someone inside who keeps it rolling. This is the experience of the Antaryami, the inner controller. As Sri Ramakrishna explained, God is the inner guide dwelling in everyone's heart. Later, I asked Swami Gitananda to clarify the difference between the Antaryami, and which is the inner controller, and the Sakshi Chaitanya, the witness consciousness. He explained that in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, we are identified with Brahman itself. There is nothing to witness. If we return from Nirvikalpa Samadhi, and many don't, after 21 days, the body drops off, then we see the universe from the standpoint of Sakshi Chaitanya as the witness. He said, only after Nirvikalpa Samadhi is one established in the witness consciousness. Whereas when the mind is involved in this universe, we see that the Antaryami does everything. We do nothing. As Sri Ramakrishna said, thou art the doer, I am thy instrument. The witness consciousness is a practice to be the witness and also an experience, as is the Antaryami, a practice, thou art the doer, and an experience. When we receive holy company, details of a sadhu's personal life help us to identify with them. It deepens our connection with them and gives us hope and faith in leading a spiritual life. And we become more receptive to their life's example and teachings. Swami Gitananda shared, from a young age, I wanted to be a monk, but I thought the sadhus of the Ramakrishna mission were babus. Then someone gave me the Katamrita, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. I liked it very much. Then I read the life of Swamiji by his brother. That impressed me. Someone offered to take me to the mat. They asked if I wished to join. I said yes. I returned home because I needed some money, which I received. Then, without telling my family, I went away to the Madras mat under Swami Kailashananda, a disciple of Swami Brahmananda. I offered to type Swami Saradananda's biography of his master, Sri Ramakrishna, the Great Master, 1/2 hour in the morning and 1/2 hour in the evening. It was not any one Swami that inspired me, he said. It was those 2 books. After joining, I wanted to serve Swami Virajananda, the 6th president of the Ramakrishna order. So for 2 to 3 months toward the end of his life, the authorities allowed me. That was when I met Swami Atmasthananda. Towards the end of my 1997 pilgrimage, I asked Swami Gitananda about his association with Swami Virajananda, Holy Mother's disciple, whom he served for 2 to 3 months. Why? Because we remember the stories. I asked the Swami if he ever saw Swami Virajananda in a spiritual mood. Swami Gitananda said yes. Once he wanted to eat, and the monks told him it was against the doctor's advice. So Maharaj said, call the doctor. And when the doctor came, he always entered his room with his shoes on. Are you God? Asked Virajananda. No, Maharaj, I am your doctor, that is all. I prescribe for your health. You do as you wish. All right, the Swami said. So he ate. After Swami Virajananda passed away, the doctor came to his room, but this time he took off his shoes. Someone asked, why? Why did you do this? And the doctor answered, when I was the doctor, it was like that. But now that he is gone, it is different. The doctor later divulged, when Swami Virajananda asked me, are you God? Something happened. This is how the Vedanta spiritual tradition remains a living tradition. By this oral tradition that throws such a rare light on the eternal divine play, and by the memories of great souls that continue to inspire our lives.